what I want, Bob Fellaini here, and after Kent's description of the report, I want to jump into this quickly because then I want hopefully the answers will be quick because I want to make this presentation robust and interactive. But if we look at the report as Kent described it, from each of your backgrounds, who come from experienced backgrounds in manufacturing, automotive, banking, finance, and advisory, what are the takeaways that are most important here from your perspective, from your industry? Let's start with that one. Jenny, why don't you start us off?
Thank you very much. I want to say this is a very good report. I strongly encourage everybody to look at it, and thank you very much for putting them together. I know it's a lot of work, and both of you have done a lot of work to put them together. I think for us, this report actually helped us to validate the understanding that we have in terms of challenges and also opportunities in China, as well as help us to reaffirm our strategy of continue to invest in China. And not only in the automation side of the manufacturing, but also talking about people development and also really looking at design and doing products in our R&D activity who's suitable for China market and our China partner, and very importantly, be concentrated on customer service.
Jason?
Sure. After reviewing the presentation, I'd have to say most of the concerns of U.S. companies who are investing in China are consistent year over year. Some of them are changing, and some of the concerns are increasing as a percentage of importance. I think U.S. corporates have always been interested in investing in China. How they do so is changing daily, and from a financial standpoint, I think the biggest concern with the local treasurers or the HQ CFOs and treasurers, how are they going to invest or increase investment in China? Registered capital, invested capital, the difference, the borrowing gaps, the concerns, the rules and regulations, SAFE, PBOC, what's changing, what's not. You need some financial institutions to help, CPAs, law firms, companies who are entering China for the first time. It's very challenging. Companies that have been here for quite some time can provide some advice and counsel. So I think the report in itself provided a good opportunity for us to examine challenges that have always been there, and then it was interesting for me to see what has changed. The financial metrics of some of the companies, while there might be a dip, it's important to note that they do rely on the parent in most cases to supply a corporate guarantee and or provide support. And so it's educating the parent in how to help support the subsidiary entity. That's most important.
Thank you. Look, I was very heartened by the report. It's certainly a very comprehensive report. And if I look in the context of what the Ford Motor Company is doing in China, where we're investing significantly of the order of $5 billion, we're seeking to double our production capacity by 2015, 15 new models by that time. And I look at the optimism that's contained in this report. I'm certainly think we're doing the right thing.
Just being able to get down into the guts of this for months and kind of swim in the data, I'm constantly amazed as we look at these challenges and see how serious they really are. And yet, as Russell said, that optimism, 91%. Now we have two options there. We're all either completely crazy, and I can't totally eliminate that yet. But number two, we are optimistic because we do see those opportunities, and those of us who are sitting here understand that there are challenges. We've accepted them. It's just what we've got to get through. But we see that opportunity, and it's nerve-wracking but encouraging at the same time.
Kent, one of the more interesting observations in the report that you mentioned was China going from being optional to being essential in most of the C-suites of American international companies. That means that CEOs are, in my experience certainly in spending time with American companies, would indicate that's accurate. What are the examples of when a company makes a decision to go from looking at China as optional to being essential? What does that mean for your business and for the climate of business in your respective industries?
Okay, I think what's going to be very important from a CEO perspective is how do we increase our, shareholders' value? In China, by far, if you look at, even though the new normal that everybody recognized that the GDP is not going to have the double-digit growth in the future, the cost is high, you still have a lot of challenges in there, but by far, this is the place around the world where you have a lot of good markets, good opportunities, and good growth. I take 7-8% GDP growth any day. People might say, why didn't you have 12%? Well, look around the world, there's minus, there's 1%, there's 2%. So this is still a very important market, for our CEO, for our company. And this is the place where we need to continue to invest, continue to look for opportunities where we can really raise our shareholders' value and their expectation of us.
I think from an international standpoint, China tends to be the #1 topic of conversation with all CFOs and treasurers in the U.S. That was the case when I was in the U.S. for 15 years before moving to China, and that still is the case going forward. To a lesser extent, perhaps Brazil. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, the fiscal cliff topic of conversation is the #1 issue right now. Perhaps Jack Liu can help provide a solution as the new Treasury chief, but China is the focus. I think it's a matter of educating the CFO and the treasurers about how to do business in China. That's our job here in China, to provide information on the best practice, things that have changed, new rules and regulations. So it's definitely a topic of conversation that's at the forefront. I see it every day.
I think China is the world's largest automotive market. It's some 18 to 19 million units in the past year, and forecast to grow by the next decade to perhaps more than 30 million units. So you can't be a serious and meaningful player in the global automotive industry if you don't have a good-sized and well-managed business here in China. In our context, we have very, very strong support from our team in Detroit and our head office into our investments and our strategy in China. Our focus was to get the base plan correct, and then it's really a question of going through the implementation phase of that. But as an industry, we're used to working in highly competitive markets. We're used to working with complex regulation, whether it be from a technical perspective, a business competition policy perspective. So that type of environment doesn't necessarily faze us.
I think one of the challenges of when China becomes a need to have, link that with the primary strategy for companies here, which is China for China. To be China for China, you need to be able to make decisions locally. You need to be able to create products and solutions that are sold locally. And you need to do that here. And it's not always going to be done by people who look like me. It's going to be done by a wide variety of people. And that's probably the biggest challenge to the C-suite, is they like the idea of China becoming really good and a lot of revenue and profit, and woohoo, that's pretty exciting. But when you have to outsource decision making, when that gets away from New York or Chicago or something and is centered here, that's when it starts to get real.
Let's follow that up, Kent. If we ask Jenny and Russell, you're both in manufacturing. Kent's point is decentralization, that one of the impacts probably is that all international companies are decentralizing management. What are the pluses and minuses of that? And if you had to make one decision critically from some of the statistics here in your sector, what would it be that you could do from China that may not be well understood at your head office?
I think for TE perspective, China for China is actually our strategy since 2009. That was set up into, by our board members and decided we're going to go China. And to go China, including the organization, including the manufacturing, the sourcing, the people development, and the customer focus. So I would say so one of the things I would like to see the TE do more about, this is really the area that would like to be more concentrated, is how do we design our product by the R&D people that we have here, how do we enhance that, and really for the customers in China. And the customer in China is not just the Chinese domestic companies, it's also multinationals who actually manufacturing a lot here. But we cannot ignore the market here. We also cannot ignore the Chinese company going to go overseas, and they're already doing that. So how to team up with them, be the partner with them, that will be the essential point for us. Right now, we have about 2,000 R&D engineers in China. We're looking at continue to grow that.
I would concur very much with what Jenny has said. In our case, we have a significant and growing R&D element within our operations here in China that ensures that the products that we do offer in the marketplace are as close and in tune with the demands of this particular marketplace as they can possibly be. Also, I think we have an advantage. We have our regional Asia-Pacific offices located here in Shanghai. So in terms of, as a company, being able to make nimble and quick decisions in response to changing market conditions, we can move very, very quickly as well.
So Jason, you've got the most iconic bank name of any in this city, in this country. How do you look at your head office? Well, you don't have to go very far to look at HSBC, and you're in the service business. What do you need from your head office to expand in your areas?
Sure, I think Russell brought up a good point as well. Before I answer the question directly, I do see regional Asia-Pacific headquarters moving more to Shanghai. I think the days of Hong Kong being the gateway to China are decreasing exponentially. Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai is to provide value-added support as a regional treasury center. I actually find more and more companies are becoming less decentralized in China as they want to essentially become more autonomous within the region. There are benefits for treasury managers within Chengdu, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, working together as up with treasury solutions. So I think the days of US corporates moving their treasury centers from an Asia-Pacific headquarters to Shanghai are going to increase substantially. As far as HSBC, and our headquarters is in London, but theoretically it's in Hong Kong, and that's where the growth, senior executives are in Hong Kong. We see, and in China as well, and we see the growth opportunities, the cross-border flows in Asia Pacific, and that's the big key for us. Our strength is helping the international, multinational corporations do business, and the growth opportunities are definitely here in Asia, and working hand in hand with our colleagues throughout the Asia Pacific region.
So Kent, you're in the risk management advisory business.
It's a great market. It's a great market.
How does this report play out in your business in respect to issues of risk, and how you would rate your own experiences against some of the conclusions of this report?
Well, obviously the issues of compliance and fraud and corruption and IPR and things like that is what we deal with every day. To tie that into your question about the headquarters, when we're dealing with a client on a fraud issue or something like that, headquarters loves to get their fingers involved in that. And I understand, you need someone from headquarters, and you've got a global compliance, and that's where a lot of the lawyers sit. I get that. But a lot of the way of solving problems needs a different method here sometimes, and a way of analyzing things. And that's where, when you get into a risk issue, and it could be a manufacturing issue, capacity, quality, whatever it is, headquarters swoops in and thinks, they have a big S on their chest and they're going to swoop in and save everything. Doesn't always work that way. And yes, we don't always have the experience here, and we're all learning, but I think there needs to be a transition over to that, particularly in managing some of these challenges.
Why don't we turn to some of the challenges at the top of the list, which I think are interesting, cost of operations here. And I always think of, there's an interesting contradiction here. Since we have Ford Motor Company represented on the stage, when I was a kid going to school, one of the great stories about Henry Ford was he really got into a lot of trouble in about 1906, 07, when he doubled the wages of his workers to, I think, from $5 or $10 a day. And his competitors really thought that was a stupid idea. And his answer when asked why did he do it, he says, because my employees can now afford to buy my car. So when we look at those labor costs, aren't we looking at a plus, a silver lining, if you will, in respect of who's the consumer out there? If incomes are rising at 20+ % per annum, how do we look at those costs? And what kind of strategies do you look at cost versus income level gains in the top of the list?
Well, I'd be very happy if the Ford Motor Company was to adopt a similar policy now. In seriousness, look, I think the issue of cost is a significant business issue. And it's something we as business leaders just have to manage our way through. There's some costs that we can deal with. There's some costs that are outside our control. For example, commodity costs. So in that context, all we can do is seek to ensure that we use those commodities or whatever we are buying, the purchase services that are becoming more expensive, more efficiently. So we have to continually think of different ways for doing things, different approaches to how we go about our business, at the same time ensuring that we do not compromise the quality or integrity or the value of our product.
Cost is a concern, especially for TE. We have about 17 factories in China, about 30,000 employees. So the labor cost increases is a concern. The commodity cost increase is a concern. The transportation cost is also going up. So what we have to do is, number one, we're looking at a lot about automation. So how can we automate it? So we'll be more efficient. We continuously looking for ways to keep our costs down. Like, what you said is we do not compromise our services as well as the quality of our product. But at the same time, I think we're also looking for value add chain. So how do you design products actually give you a higher value than you were before, so that you're looking for the product mix as well as how do you do your distribution? I think for the manufacturing sector, this is a place that we will be and we will always be here. But whether you can really get your business going and really get winning the war is really how you're executing a lot of these very simple strategies. So,
Jason, how about your clients? Are they in terms of dealing with costs here, and what's the plus and the minus? Is the weighting still that the costs are greater than the opportunity of customers in sectors? Obviously, that presumes differentiation of industry, but would you comment on that about your clients?
Sure, yeah, it depends on the sector, absolutely. The first week after Chinese New Year always presents an issue for manufacturing companies throughout China, and whether or not the labor force will actually return to the manufacturing facility. And so that's part of a due diligence standpoint for financial institutions throughout China. The first week back could be potentially a gauge for how the factory is going to perform over the next quarter. Or potentially it could be a gauge going forward whether or not labor prices are sufficiently high enough that the employee wants to return. So we'll see in the next couple of weeks whether that's the case. I think all companies within China are experiencing 10% double-digit labor cost growth, and it's a concern. Where is the manufacturing going? Is it moving west? Is it moving south to Vietnam, Bangladesh? There are rumors that the next manufacturing location would be in Africa. I've heard rumors, I haven't seen any evidence of this. So we'll see. I think, China is an enormous country. It's almost as large as the United States, and has a population that is one of the few countries that can handle the manufacturing needs of the rest of the world. So I'm not confident that anything is going to depart China. It might just transition to different regions, or you might have areas such as Xi'an focus on technology, and you'll have different regions within China focus on different manufacturing needs. But labor costs is a significant issue going forward.
Let's turn to regulatory issues, and that was pretty hot, Kent, on topics. And I like to play let's pretend for a second here. I'm going to pretend that I'm Mr. Li Keqiang, the new premier of China. And all of you are putting on my desk my first week of these kind of whiny reports that say, you know, the regulations of China are unfair. And when I look at the regulatory system, which only began 10 years ago with China's accession to WTO, we wanted to create a regulatory system that worked. And it's getting bigger. And we hear the same complaints by Chinese companies. And now you're whining that these regulatory systems are becoming more difficult. Tell me, give me examples of how the regulatory system of China is unfair for you against the backdrop of my Chinese companies. Could you give me any examples of that?
I'm going to jump in and actually support that. We're constantly asked to come in and look at our clients' commercial practices. And the suspicion is that the local companies are bribing everybody and giving kickbacks and blah, blah, blah. And so we go in and do the investigation. We come back. More often than not, they're not. Or not anymore than anybody else is. What they are good at is they're very good at local stakeholder management. They're good at getting to know local people and really getting into the community where they are and all the different places they are. So it's a lesson for all of us that, yeah, there's always going to be stuff out there. But part of combating that preference for local companies piece is that we have an opportunity to get in and get to know local officials, get in more in the local area. And again, frankly, it's going to be our local employees and our colleagues who are going to be able to do that very often, more than, you know, big, tall, pale white guy. Great point. How about you, Jenny? You're talking to Li Keqiang now. You're saying the regulatory system is really unfair. And what examples can you give me that would indicate that's the case?
First of all, I hope I don't, have to tell him about this one, when I see him. But I would say, working in China for all these years, my way of looking at it is, you hear a lot of speculations, you do, and until you have proof, it's better you be very considerate how do you say it. And I would say, in my feeling is, sometimes they have a special award systems or special subsidy systems, which probably the foreign companies may not be aware of. And so how do you get that information? That may be one channel I think a lot of us need to figure it out. In my past experiences, once you know it, you can actually enjoy it. But it's to knowing that information, it may not come to us because we may not receive the regular publications and things like that. But when I came to China in '93, my predecessor told me something about his experience in China. 20 years later, I still think it's very true. It's called Everything is Possible in China, Nothing's Easy. So communication and keep trying.
Russell, how about you? You got a chance here to take a shot for Ford Motor Company on the regulatory issues.
Look, I think as I said earlier in response to one of the earlier questions, we are an industry that is used around the world to dealing in regulatory environments, sometimes quite complex as they relate to motor vehicle technical standards, as well as some of the business issues. So in that context, China is just another market that we have to do business in. If I would have one message that I would give concerning regulation, and I would give it to any country leader that I had the privilege to interact with, it would be the importance of clarity and consistency of regulation. And where new regulations are being proposed, particularly for a manufacturing industry that's engineering based and can have long lead times, that there be appropriate phasing in arrangements. But I would give that same message whether I be in China, Australia, South Africa, India, or Thailand.
So as a global company, you're advocating standards by which are global. That would be the message that you carry to Beijing, is that you're gonna turn out to be a better player on the world stage with uniformity of global regulations.
Where possible and appropriate, yes.
Jason, you don't have any regulatory problems in banking, of course. Would you like any comments to the chairman of the China Banking Regulatory Commission about that subject?
Well, Russell mentioned two words: consistency, clarity are probably, if I'm a CFO, treasurer, or local treasury manager in China, I'm from Wisconsin, and I was speaking with Kent about how he's from Minnesota. I guarantee you the differences of doing business in Minnesota and Wisconsin are not that different. However, interpreting rules and regulations in Beijing could sometimes be much different at the local level. And that's a huge concern for our clients throughout China, that safe regulations in Chengdu or safe regulations in Suzhou could be vastly interpreted differently than they are in Beijing. Understanding that and having representatives and help and colleagues, banks and CPAs and advisory in that location who can sit with local regulators or sit with members of SAFE or PBOC at that local level is extremely important. Not just China to Singapore consistency, but actually within China itself.
One of the interesting aspects of this, going back to the financials, is revenues. Revenues down, profits up, perhaps the competitive landscape. What's the next 2 years in your industry show in looking at those results where we've got profitability seems to be going up, but revenues coming down? Is that a similar experience in your respective industries? Do you see that?
For the electronic industries, right now our forecast still looks very optimistic for the next few years. We're thinking of, with the increase of the salaries that China has, the consumer purchasing power actually stronger. So that's the reason why we're looking at a lot of these electronics, consumer products. We believe the market is very good. On top of it, we're also looking at some recovery of economy from the other parts of the world as well. So a lot of these things are very possible. The other area which we really very focus on is really our local Chinese customers, which we believe that they can be a very big potential to be a worldwide names and also a worldwide brand. And for those are the ones we like to be very close to them. And those are the areas we would like to get, more increase in our sales in those areas. So I think the overall the outlook for the electronic industry is good.
In our case, our revenues are obviously growing strongly as our investment plan comes through into fruition. Last year, for example, our vehicle sales here in China were 21% higher than the year before. Strong growth, particularly in the back part of the year, and we expect that to continue strongly as our new models and our come on stream and our production capacity doubles to almost 1.2 million vehicles per annum. As regards profitability, we don't break out our profitability by market.
Jason, how does HSBC look in China on the revenue and profitability side?
I think we're growing exponentially here in China. There are markets such as the United States where HSBC is growing substantially, and China as well. So we look at it from a strategic standpoint, cross-border flows, identifying top 20 countries where we see trade flows, and we're following the trade flows. So the exponential growth in China, we're following it. Exponential growth in the U.S., we actually are seeing growth in the U.S. There are many, many more companies that are interested in doing business in China and or growing their existing presence in China, and that will only help foster HSBC's growth within the region.
As a professional services company, the keeping people and keeping experienced people is very difficult. It's management, across all of our things. And the wages are rising very rapidly there as well. I have several of my team members here. This does not constitute a promise, but wages are going up. And it's all, don't record, please. And that's a huge challenge. And to communicate that back to headquarters, there still is this view of cheap China. There's still, I don't know what memo they got, but there still is that view. And it's really hard to fight against.
We got to get your report distributed better. I'm going to, the last question before I turn to the audience, and this is one that relates to, the report is certainly skewed by virtue of size and importance to multinational companies. And some might conclude by reading this report that there's maybe not enough room for SMEs, for American SMEs. AmCham last year launched the SME Center, and we've had terrific response to that center. But what do you think that this report tells? Do you think that there's still room for smaller companies to enter this market? Is it too late, or what would you say about smaller companies?
I would definitely say there's always room for smaller companies, small, medium size. China market is very large. It's not just Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. It's actually a very big geographical area. Really depends on what you're focused on. You could be going to the tier 3, tier 4 cities. You still be able to do a fairly good business over there. I would suggest to the small, medium-sized company and be focused on where you want to do your business and what do you want to do, and get very familiar with your environments and decide how you want to build. China is very large and it's very different from one end to the other. So if you kind of feel like you want fast expansion, that may be more difficult for the small, medium size. But at the same time, the challenges you have highlighted in this report is the same for the multinational as well as the small, medium-sized companies.
Jason, you got a good vision from your client base on this. Do you see smaller companies from the U.S. coming here, or is it only going to be multinationals?
Well, I primarily cover the corporate side, but from HSBC does have a business banking group. How the AmCham report defines SME segment is I think it's companies with 500 employees or less. HSBC defines it as companies with global revenue of 50 million or less. And so I think with any company who's entering China, you really have to do your homework. How much registered capital versus invested capital. Whether or not you're going to establish a rep office or you're going to establish a WUFI. Understanding the ramifications, the rules, the regulations, because once you file registration with SAFE and PBOC and you get everything approved from a documentation standpoint, it's extremely hard to change. From a banking standpoint, these SMEs need to understand fund flows, use of funds, use of bank proceeds. And so understanding that is exorbitantly more important at the SME level because you cannot afford to make a mistake. And you need advice and counsel for every aspect of that establishing of the SME business here in China.
Direct interaction with the vehicle manufacturer. You can be a tier 2 supplier that supplies into the tier 1 or a tier 3. Every level is critical toward the performance of the overall industry. So I know being a tier 1 supporter is good for, if you like, bragging rights, but being a tier 3 or a tier 2 can be just as important to the overall viability of the industry itself. So certainly space. I think any economy where the growth is 7% plus a year has got to offer good opportunities. And just to pick up the themes from my colleagues here, and I think the same would apply for any market that you were looking around the world, do your homework, do your homework.
25%, I think it was, Frank, 25% identified SME? David, is that what it was? We asked that question, are you an SME? We defined it as 500 employees or under globally. And 25% of those came out. And I think there are a few differences here and there, but everybody is looking at the same opportunities as a supplier. We're all facing the same challenges. China is the great leveler in some ways.
I think at this time I'd like to turn it open to a very large and intelligent and educated audience. And I know Brenda's going to be my referee. She's pretty good at it. But maybe I'd like to start out with, are there questions that coming from the floor that, Ken, I'm going to give you the first shot here. If it tell us what you do as well, your company.
Kenneth Yu with 3M Company. And the question, Kenneth Yu with 3M Company, the question is for Russell. For foreign automotive OEM, looking into the next 5 years, what can go wrong?
Thank you. Look, I would like to think that we had a very, very good and sound business plan, high quality, high value products, well manufactured, a very good distribution network. But we're an industry globally that is very much rides the economic wave. It's a cyclical nature of the business that we're in. So I suppose if I look at what could go wrong, maybe there'll be a slowing at some point in the economic level of economic activity. But that would not necessarily be something that we had not experienced in other markets throughout the world at other times.
We had a question over here, I believe. And please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Emmanuel. I'm professor at Antai College of Management, Shanghai Jiao Tong Dashi. Question for Russell, sorry. Chinese cities have urged government officials to buy local cars for their official fleets. How do you see that affecting Ford?
I think, as I understand it, there's been some Chinese cities that have done that. Government purchases are only a small part of the overall automotive market. So there's still an enormous market out there, private buyers, private commercial buyers for motor vehicles. And at this stage, we're certainly selling as many vehicles as we can produce and intend to continue to do so.
Merci.
Yes, right here.
Hi, Brian Kapovic from AmCham. I have a question probably a bit more for Jenny and Russell in the manufacturing sector. And this comes from along the lines, I think Bob started the discussion about regulatory structure and what it means for your business. I work in environmental services, so I'm very interested in this. What I didn't hear the panel really go into, there was talk about consistency and clarity, but it was really about the regulations as written, both within China and globally. I'm interested in the topic of consistency with respect to, I hate to say enforcement, but maybe application with respect to foreign versus domestic companies. And how do you see that affecting your business going more and more forward, and even driving some of your decisions regarding location, geography within China?
I think location is very important. Recently, we did a 5-city survey to look for our next manufacturing campus. And one of the very important things that we do the survey for is how do you interpret some of these laws, which is emphasized by the central government, and how it was applied locally. And to me, I think for any multinationals, we like to do business where transparency is available to us to the best they can. And also the government who's willing to communicate with us, which understand what we're driving for, what's important to us. So to me, that will be something that we focus on. It's very difficult to get to the extent to say, are you treating us fairly between domestic companies and foreign companies? Because if you start a conversation that way, I think that's become a very short conversation. So normally what we would like to do is look at the law and sometimes compare with some other cities, how do they treat these things. I give you one example, like the social benefit for the foreigners. That's a very big issue for us. And we tested that among different cities and see how they interpret it and how they will view that. And for that one, right now, we kind of feel like as the cities get closer to the Beijing capital, they tend to be more strict. As the city get closer to the Yangtze Delta and the Pearl River Delta, they tend to be more international practice. So I would suggest a company who wants to look for a site really get to know your local government very well, because if you're wholly owned, that is your partner.
I think in the case of automotive, there's two elements of regulation that can, if you like, influence our business. Firstly, there's regulation that can influence our production facilities, if you like, our factories. Now, in those cases, there is a smaller number of governments or government agencies that we need to deal with, because we don't have factories located in every city or every province in a country. Secondly, there is actually the motor vehicles we produce themselves. And there is regulatory activities that relate primarily to safety and environmental performance. Generally speaking, over time, what we're dealing with there is national regulation. And the issue of, if you like, enforcement comes back to us ensuring at the time that we design the vehicle and engineer the vehicle and produce it, that it complies with the appropriate standard. I think in that space, though, the main driver of high standard is in effect not the government necessarily, but the consumer. The consumers, if I look at them in China, want high quality vehicles, vehicles that they can regard as safe for the travel of their families, vehicles that they regard as having a strong sustainability influence, and of course, vehicles that offer great value. So I think if we're meeting the needs and expectations of our consumers, then invariably we will meet the needs and expectations of the regulators.
Dan, and then Steve.
Thank you. Dan Krasenstein with Procon Pacific. We do industrial bulk packaging. It's a question for Kent, because you haven't gotten enough abuse today. I see the top major concerns or top business challenges: rising costs, HR constraints, domestic competition. Do your statistics allow you to break it down on a China regional basis? I mean, the verbiage China for me is always a confusing term, because what I find true in the Yangtze River Delta is completely different up in Shandong or further inland than Anhui and Henan. And although many of us are based here with our regional headquarters, our manufacturing bases are spread throughout China. And I found in my own experiences, what's true in Jiangsu is not true in Shandong or Anhui. And I'm wondering if your stats do give us any indication to prove that's true or false. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan. The short answer is yes, kind of. Year by year, we keep expanding the demographic section. And for those of you who complete all of it, thank you very much. It's an arduous thing at the beginning to have 15 questions about who you are and where you are, but it's very helpful for us. Next week, we're going to be in Suzhou, and with Suzhou AmCham, talking about the YRD and the importance of that, and very manufacturing heavy, less services, less retail, of course. So it is a very different look. I mean, I think there's a time lag going on. I think the issues that we faced here 5-10 years ago are now being faced by other areas. We kind of see that move. Particularly when you get some of the challenges, you look at some of the IPR issues, labor disputes, fraud, things like that. I mean, most of the work that we do is in Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 7 cities as things are moving that direction. Shanghai, we don't have that much happening right here. So I think you do see a wave happening there. It's a great statement to say this is China. You kill yourself out of the starting block. And it's the more detail we can provide, the better.
Thank you. Steve Ganser?
Yes, Steve Ganster with Technomic Asia. There were two findings that were interesting to me particularly. One was the domestic competition, which was the third biggest challenge. I don't remember that being on the survey last year. And then the preference for organic growth versus M&A. Given the fact that growth is why we're in China dominantly, and growth is going to get tougher with companies like Russell, and I think that's representative across many industries who are investing to grow, plus a large number of more powerful domestic companies. One strategy to address both the domestic competition and achieve growth is acquisition. So I was actually a little surprised at that finding, and I wanted really the panel, including you, Bob, what do you feel does that feel right to you, and if so, what's behind it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's skewed towards the fact that we have a mature AmCham. Our membership are really established. And my takeaway, even though we're active in M&A, is that M&A is actually increasing from the U.S. dramatically. But that's why we're creating the SME Center, for one reason for that, because we're seeing much more development, particularly on the consumer and, as Ken pointed out, the quality of life themes. We haven't even begun to hit those sectors, as we know, and those companies are really looking for a jump start. But I think there's pluses and minuses. I think to see the sophistication that companies feel comfortable about organic growth is really important if you're here. If you're here for 20 years and you were still stuck on M&A, your business model might be worth reviewing. But on the other hand, there are companies here that know that they're going to have to grow by acquisition that aren't already here. And it goes to the point about moving from China is no longer optional, it's essential. And that list keeps growing and the sectors keep growing as well. So I think that's my take on M&A versus organic growth.
I concur what you just said, and T's been here for 24 years, so we already have a fairly, good base for us to grow. And we are still looking at M&A opportunity. We did not say we're not going to do that, but when you made a comparison, the M&A side is actually probably going to be less than our organic growth. And part of it is what we want to do on organic growth. We continue to invest. The other part is also the integration when you do the M&A with the domestic companies. After you did the M&A, the integration actually is not that easy. Especially you would like to know is what you're buying for is really what you're getting. So to us, it's really a comparison of the two, but we will continue to do both.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing M&A activity increase in China over the last couple quarters. I've sat on 2 meetings this week alone, and construction engineering company as well as a retail company. I think the biggest concern is the due diligence. How do you solve the due diligence question? And also distribution. So companies are looking to buy, if you're a retail company, you're looking to buy a company that has distribution, and whether or not you can solve your own distribution issues by that acquisition. So it might not be the product itself, it could be the network at the local level that you're actually acquiring that could help benefit. So the M&A activity is increasing, at least people are talking about it. Closing of the deals, that's another issue right there.
We have time for maybe one more question. Yes.
Hello, my name is Tamis Low with the Lee Ford Company and a former professor of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I've been researching also the China market for quite a while. And the people issue always become an important one. And at this survey is named as the number 2 issues. Can the panel elaborate a little bit on the people issue? And also, my question would like to ask the panel to forecast 10 years later, how will this issue be about? Thank you.
In the financial service industry, so people and the demographics, I think, is the question. It still tends to be a very young generation that's coming into the banking. Everyone on my team is in their 20s and with limited banking experience, in fluent English, fantastic education. They're coming from all different regions of within China, so they're obtaining their MBAs and their financial degrees and moving to Shanghai and wanting jobs in the financial sector. More women in the financial sector than men. Men tend to be more interested, or men students tend to be more interested in the sciences, but at least in the corporate banking sector. Carol is on my team here. We can represent the demographics accordingly. But I think from an experience standpoint, it's still fairly young.
I think for TE, people is actually a very important issue, particularly in the people retention and people development. And you also have to look at different categories of the people that we're looking at. For the senior management part, we actually think that's very critical. As much as we localize more of the position and do China for China, we're looking for people who can take that leadership position in order to do that. And that is actually not that easy. They also, because we're multinational, we're looking for people who understand how to work in a multinational environment. That makes it, more than just speaking the English, but it's how do you communicate, and also getting the alignment. Now, in the middle part of the management team, what we're looking for is people who's willing to take that accountabilities and making the decisions. And how do we train people to work that way and work as a team is really what we're looking for. And for the new staff, the younger generation, we try to understand what do they want, what is important to them. I can give you one example, very interesting. We hired a very young graduate, he's in the 90s, and he showed up for work for about 2 days, then he didn't show up for 3 days. We're very worried about what happened to him. So we tried to call him and couldn't find him. Finally, he showed up the 4th day, and we asked him, how come you weren't here for the past 3 days? He says, well, it was raining and I don't have an umbrella. So.
Look, our case is that we at Ford are investing an enormous amount of money in the development of our young people. Recruiting very, very strongly of local national employees, investing strongly in their training. We've got some fantastic, passionate, highly intelligent, keen people with our organisation, and they will move through their careers to become, if you like, tomorrow's leaders of our organisation here in China. At this stage, we do have a number of what we call foreign service employees. Our plan over time would obviously be to have less foreign service employees here in China.
The key issue here is experience. And, working in China is kind of like reverse dog years. Working 1 year here is like working 7 years in Chicago. So you can really microwave that experience. But a year is still a year. And I've got an incredibly talented young team, very educated, English better than I'll ever have with my Minnesota accent. I mean, just they're fantastic. But a year is still a year. 10 years from now, they're going to have 10 years more. And to me, that's a huge encouragement. I think that's where the competition in our business is on those people that have that kind of experience.
I want to thank our panelists, Russell, Jason, Jenny, Kent, and particularly for all of your insights. That was terrific. I think it really complemented the report. Kent, thanks for a great job on this report. What this report really means to me is since the Academy Awards were a couple of days ago, I think if I were going to have the right to award an Oscar to Best Supporting Actor for creating a national economy in China, it would be to U.S. companies like yourselves, that over 30-some years that I've witnessed companies that have added value and be part of this fabric. So I hope that all of you would use this report in many different ways, and to certainly use it as a starting point for a lot of activities. I want to thank Robert Griffiths and Bill Brecky for support from the embassy, for the consulate, U.S. government, and I want to thank our leader who we're going to lose in a few months, I'm afraid, Brenda Foster, for all of her work. So thank you for coming, and hope you keep in contact with us in respect to the pursuit of American industry in China.
Thank you all for attending.